I think the important thing is that this is a global public health problem with transmissible diseases. Nobody anywhere in the world is safe just because they've got a vaccine to protect their own population. But what it does do is raise that tension between publicly funded development and also privately funded development. We need both. And then, of course, this question always rises as to who owns that at the end of it.
What is the process? How does a vaccine get approved, and what happens next in terms of making it available to the general public?
So there's two kind of major phases. First of all, you have the clinical trials to show that the vaccine actually works and protects people. But then there's a second phase where you actually manufacture and sell a product. And both of these have difficulties. So what we see is that we get this sort of public support for many vaccine trials, but that's coupled by the private investment in research by the company. And then in the manufacturing phase, again, you'll have that situation that there might be private companies doing the manufacturing, and there needs to be a public access as well. So it's a really complicated situation with lots of different factors pushing in different directions.
What contribution have countries such as Australia made in supporting global cooperation during the pandemic?
So I think there's been an enormous amount of data sharing all across the world, and that's really valuable. We're seeing sort of unprecedented levels of scientists sharing their data as early as they possibly can. And what that means is you get this joined up picture and sharing of that information. And that will be particularly true for something like vaccine research, where there's so many different levels and complexities going in. And so we've got that collaborative science, so we need to make sure that the actual medicines that arise from that are also freely accessible to everyone.
Yet I understand there have been attempts to secure exclusive rights to the vaccine. Donald Trump, for one, has got in there early and reportedly offered large sums of money to a German company.
Yeah, so I think one thing we do need to remember is that for a pharmaceutical company to invest heavily, and it really is huge sums of money needed to develop a vaccine, they have to be able to make sure that they can reassure their investors that they will get a return on that. If we don't have private companies investing, then we won't have any vaccines, or we'll have to put up all of the money to develop them from the public purse, which hasn't typically happened. So those two things need to be balanced out, and we need to make sure that people do get to sell the vaccine, but not in an exclusive way.
Well, presumably there would be enormous pressure for whoever comes up with a vaccine to not patent it so everyone can access it.
And I think that's one of the things we'll see. So you could see that there might be an opportunity for a company to charge very large sums of money, but I think that's not in their interest because there'll be huge reputational damage. And again, particularly for these large multinationals, they sell many different products, many different medicines, and they can't afford that reputational damage. So I think we'll find business working in concert with the public sector to make sure that we come up with agreements that are as effective as possible to distribute the vaccines that are developed as widely as possible.
So how much do you think it's likely going to cost, and what determines the price we will have to pay to get vaccinated?
Yeah, so there's a number of different factors. One big factor is to pay back that massive risky investment. And of course, we know that not every vaccine will necessarily work. So a company is investing hundreds of millions of dollars potentially in vaccine development with no guarantee they'll sell a single dose. So that needs to be paid back. The other side of it, of course, is that the more widely the vaccine can be used, so the cheaper the vaccine dose is, the more effective it will be. And so there have been a lot of negotiations and discussions for other vaccines over the years. The price of an actual vaccine does vary widely depending on what type of vaccine it is. Often that comes down to the manufacturing process. Some vaccines are much harder and more expensive than to develop, but they can cost anything from tens of cents for the most widely available vaccine all the way up to $20, $50, $100 or more dollars.
And NGOs are calling for compulsory licensing. What would this mean, and how would this impact cost?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've learned a lot from some other situations is that you can have licensing agreements where certain groups of people get to pay different amounts of money for the same access to the same vaccine. And that could be based on the amount of resource they have. So I think that we've seen that most commonly, and we've learned most from HIV medicines, where you can have a pharmaceutical company selling the same medicine at different prices on different locations. It can be very difficult to sort this kind of thing out, but that's what we would expect to see.
And finally, how far away do you think we are from developing a vaccine for coronavirus? Where are scientists at with this?
So we are starting trials in humans, and that's really critical. But remember that it takes a while before you can see whether that vaccine works, because they don't work immediately. But even when we get one that we demonstrate it actually works, we mustn't forget that there's quite an expensive and complicated process needed to actually produce the factories that can mass produce the vaccine. So that will be the second phase. Even if we get a vaccine to work, we'll have to work out how to make enough of it to be actually useful. So that's going to take another 6 months or a year after the vaccine's actually approved.
Okay, a long road ahead. Dr. Alexander Edwards, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.